My name is Tom Green. I am the lead modeler and builder of Team 2901 Purple Gears. And today we'll be talking about how to CAD using Onshape, how to make an account, and how to get started using assemblies. We won't be going to get doing parts today, just for the sake of time, but that's going to be in a future sort of class. This will be hopefully every Friday, unless otherwise sort of stated. Yeah. So the first thing is we're going to go over what we're going to be learning today. And so in general, it's basically going to be how to do most of the things we do in Onshape. So a lot of teams don't use a lot of custom parts because they don't have access to manufacturing. But so we're going to mainly be talking about assemblies today and also how to make an account. So talk about what Onshape is, how to make an account, and then in terms of assemblies, we're going to talk about how to get parts into those assemblies, assemble them into larger mechanisms, how to make those mechanisms have more accurate motion. So one question I know a lot of people have when they first join a robotics team is, what is CAD in general? So to sum it up really quickly, CAD is just modeling and representing the real world in a virtual space. And that means creating and designing parts, assembling those parts into larger mechanisms and getting them to have accurate motion. And we do all of these things because we can do them virtually before we do them physically. That means we can save time, we can save effort, and we can sort of use that time to make more innovative, better designs. So we do things like we assemble the robot in virtually before we actually do it physically, so we can actually tell, hey, can we get these screws in here? Is it physically possible to assemble this robot? Or is there anything hitting other things? That sort of thing. It's a lot quicker to move a bar like with 3 clicks than it is to take out 4 screws and screw it in another place. So there's a few different modeling softwares, things like Creo, SolidWorks, Inventor, Onshape, Hex SketchUp, things like that. But we're going to be talking about Onshape today, and there's some reasons for that. The biggest thing with Onshape is that it's browser-based, and that means it's entirely online. There's no install. You don't need to clear out storage space. You don't need to worry about Windows deciding to update in the middle of a download, nothing like that. It's all online, and that's actually really cool for device sort of versatility. It can run on iPhones, iPads, Androids, and actually runs well on those, relative to, Creo, which can't. But the browser-based nature really lends itself well to collaboration. So especially with larger teams or teams where you have multiple people working on different parts instead of one person, collaboration is very useful in terms of this software. So a lot of people can work on the same document at once. They can actually see each other's views, watch each other move things around live. We can actually, there's something called the follow feature, where you can actually see someone else moving things around sort of at the same time. Jillian is on this document, and if I double click on her icon, I can actually follow her view. I can see her view with her mouse, see her sort of selecting things and things like that. And that's really useful, especially for presentations and things like that. So, yeah, but in that sort of area, collaboration is really useful, just like in the documents, but it's also really nice for files. So because Onshape's online, you don't have to worry about, like, if you're using Google Drive, you don't have to upload and download files. You don't have to sort of figure out, hey, am I saving over top someone else's stuff? None of that's an issue because it's all online. So let's actually get into how to make an Onshape account. Before I go into this, I want to make sure to mention we're going to be making educational accounts here. So so they say in the terms of service that you can't use them to make money. So just a note. If you have like sort of a special situation, I would recommend contacting Onshape support about that. But let's actually get into making an account itself. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go to onshape.com. And so this is their homepage. This is where they have their little advertisement, animation, the pricing, all that stuff. We don't actually have to worry about pricing because the Onshape Education Edition is completely free. Now we're going to go to the sign in page because that's actually how we're going to get to the sign up page. And once you hit the sign in page, once you hit the sign in button in the top right, it will open, if my computer decides to cooperate, a sort of the traditional login screen, maybe. And so actually down here in the bottom right of that screen, there's a sign up button. Click that. And this time, instead of going to a traditional sign up screen, I'll take you to this sort of plan selection platform or site. And what we're here, they describe the sort of different plans. So there's Onshape Professionals, this is for companies and people who make money off of Onshape. There's Onshape for makers, which is this is for people who casually use it, or people who are using it for more hobbies and things don't make any money or anything like that. Onshape Education is for students, teachers, instructors, basically anything for learning Onshape and engineering and things like that. That's the plan we're going to be using. So to make an Onshape Education account, you're going to click this Request Your Education Account button. So then that sends you to the first part of the sign up screen, hopefully. So here you're going to put in your information, your email. So you're going to be tempted to use sort of a fake email or one of those sites that lets you just sort of it gives you a trash email for verifying. I would recommend really strongly against doing that for 2 reasons. Actually 3 reasons. So I would recommend using an actual accessible email because it first actually does make you verify your email. So you need to be able to access it. And second, because in, I think just exactly a year actually, your Onshape education plan technically expires. So it just sends you a message, you just re-put in your information and you get your plan back. It doesn't lose, you don't lose anything, but you need to have that email accessible or else you can't renew that plan. So I'm gonna go ahead and just put in information and then I'm gonna put in our email. This is actually our team email. If you have any questions about this, if you have any if you want some extra clarification or want one of our team members to help you with CADing, if we have time, you can actually just contact us here, roboticsclub@cjhsnc.org. We'll actually put this on the big screen later on, or with a bigger font, I mean. So mark whether you're a student or an educator. I'm a student, so I'm marking that, and then mark what school level. I know that I don't think FTC allows universities, but if you're using it for university, not just for FTC, that's what you click, university. You agree to the terms and service, hit get started. This is where it's gonna ask about your school. Now, you do need a school website URL, so you may contact Onshape, say, hey, what happens if I don't have that? Or you may contact the nearby school and say, hey, is it okay if I put your URL on here? So what you can do is you just put in your school name. I already have done this in the past, so it remembers mine. Apparently it makes me Onshape accounts. It knows me by now. Just put in your city, your state, and your country. Graduation year. And then what you're using your Onshape for. And then, of course, the standard sort of agreeing to the terms of service. Hit I'm not a robot. Last time it made me do a CAPTCHA. And then hit create account. I'm not going to do that because I've already sent about 3 activation emails to our team account just through practice. So I'm not going to hit that button again. But once you hit that button, you're pretty much going to, once you activate your email, you're going to be mostly done with account creation. So let's actually get into assemblies and using Onshape itself. You can go to I would tab pre-logged in. So this is the Onshape home screen. There are a few things I want to make sure you guys understand here. First, so it has like the recent things up here in the folders, but these are what are called documents. These are different from files and sort of the standard organization for most modeling software. Things like Creo and SolidWorks and things like that, I know they use files, part files, assembly files, .solidwork files. Creo uses documents, and whereas part files and assembly files, they're just one singular part or assembly entity. The documents can hold multiple parts, multiple assemblies, multiple drawings, folders, imported parts. They're more like folders than anything. So for example, if I open up our main robot document, you can actually put a load. This contains all parts of our robot. So it contains the sub-assemblies, the custom parts, everything in one document. And that makes organization in Onshape much easier than having to navigate your file explorer and figure out where the heck you saved that one assembly. Yeah. But then So when you open a document, you can actually see at the bottom here, you see tabs. So you can have folders inside folders inside folders. You can actually only go 4 folders down, unfortunately. Trust me, we tried to go farther. But like you can organize things very nicely inside these documents. But to make a document, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go to this create button over here in the top left. And you can actually create a larger folder of documents. Now, of course, with documents inside folders is a little bit easier, quicker access, but you can still do folders of documents. So we're going to click document. Everything you do in Onshape is inside a document, so you can't like make a separate part from a document. But when you make a document, you need to name it. And this is where some people decide to just make random names, and I would really strongly just recommend against that. Naming conventions are consistent naming conventions are really important for organization, especially if you have a lot of parts and different projects going on at once. So I'm going to name this CAD class. Let's see, today's the 3rd. And so this name is descriptive enough that I'm going to be able to come back to it later on, know what it is just by looking at it. I'm not going to be it's not super long, so it won't require me opening up the details to actually figure out what the heck it is. So when I hit enter, it's actually just going to take me straight to the document. When you enter a document, there's a few different parts of it. Up here, you see this sort of top toolbar. This doesn't change no matter what tab you're in. So, for example, we have the document menu. Here you can rename the document. You can change the description of the document. You can change some of the workspace units, things like that. But here is one of the places where Onshape really shines, versions. So I can actually make a change, and then if I hit version, I can create a new version. So whenever I want to be like, I'm about to make a huge change, I'm going to make a version right before I do it. So I'm going to name this one, say, so first version dot test. I make sure to put test in there, and then you can actually add a description, what you changed, what you're preparing to change, things like that. This is also really useful for Engineering Notebook. So you can go back and view previous versions. So I actually did that just the other day. So I knew I didn't take the pictures I needed to of a model way back when. So when I was doing sort of the year in review for our Engineering Notebook, I got to just sort of roll back the version, take a screenshot there, and I could actually step through the progress. And so even when I hit create, you can go here to view the versions. And even if you didn't make a version, if you forgot or something, you can hit show changes. And if I make multiple changes between versions, I can go in between those individual changes to see the sort of smaller changes in progress. You can make a new version. There are things called branching and stuff, but that causes some organizational issues, so we try to avoid that. But then up here, there's one button I really want to point you guys towards, and that's the Learning Center. Learning Center is really nice in Onshape. They have great documentation, tutorials. So once you click on that, you can actually see they have walkthroughs. They have self-paced courses. So if you need to know something and you want to learn something quickly, or you just feel like, hey, I'm pretty good at Onshape already, but I want to go further, they have tutorials about pretty much every feature of Onshape that will load for once. But yeah, and so this is more than just a white screen, I swear. But this is really nice because a lot of times, especially with Onshape, which is actually relatively new software compared to things like Creo and SolidWorks, there's sometimes not a lot of media out there about it. So there might not be a sort of YouTube video on how to do X, Y, or Z. So they have sort of instructor-led training. They have live virtual trainings. They have pre-recorded videos, things like that. And so then we also have the comments. Comments are really, really useful for when you're working collaboratively and you want to make a note about a design or marking concern. So if I'll test this out later on, but I can actually select something. So let's see if it'll work. But I can hit this button right here and select an entity. So I've selected front plane and I can comment on that. So I might say, this is concerning in terms of its design strength or something like that. But then you can just open that up to view comments. You can actually reply to comments, make comment chains. And so then down here at the bottom, this is where things get a little bit tricky, are the part studios and the assemblies. Now this does tend to trip people up some. So the difference between part studios and assemblies, once you learn it, once you understand it, it's a lot easier after you've worked with them for a while. So I have a PowerPoint slide for this, PowerPoint slide for a lot of things. But to sum up, part studios are where you create parts. They're a single part sometimes. Sometimes you have like imported things or it's technically multiple, but in those, even if you have multiple parts, they don't move. They don't sort of like move around each other. There's no gears like moving. There's no wheels turning. And it's where parts are designed and created. But assemblies are many parts are combined together. They're like assembled into larger mechanisms so that you can actually see their motion, see how they interact, and see if they intersect or anything like that. So whereas an assembly might be a full robot, a part might be a single gear, that sort of thing. So when you go into the document, by default, you're in a part studio. So we're actually going to go into the assembly today. But an easy way to tell is to look at what tab is highlighted down here. And also, if you have an insert option up here, that means you're in an assembly. There won't be an insert option for part studios. And that also tends to trip people up. So people will be like, where's the insert button? And they are actually in a part studio. So let's see. Well, the first thing I need to do is I need to insert a part. But this is where I'm going to plug our team a little bit. And that's because we have a parts library of Servo City, GoBuilder, Rev, Pitsco, and Andy Mark, and I think a few other parts as well. Parts library of parts from those vendors and assemblies. We've gone through and reviewed them to make sure that all of the geometry is accurate. We've given them the part numbers, links, sort of descriptions. Now, we use that all the time. So our main robot assembly is mostly the parts from that part library. And so what you can do is if you want access to that, you can either put your email in the chat, or if you want to be a little bit more careful with email security, you can do is you can just shoot us an email at roboticsclub@cghsnc.org. And we'll freely share this. This isn't like just our teams or anything. We're actually doing this so people have an easier time with Onshape. And so this makes it so that when you there are some GoBuilder parts that don't have step files or anything that you can download. So it just makes things a lot easier and just faster to do. So if you shoot us an email there, we'll share that sort of parts library with you. But yeah. So once I'm ready to insert parts into the assembly, I'm going to go up to this insert button here. Now, of course, there's shortcuts for a lot of things. So you can just hover over things. You can actually see a description there of the different features. But it also has a shortcut listed there, I. So I'm just going to use that. So when I activate the insert sort of operation, there's 3 main tabs and then 2 sort of sub tabs. These are current document, other documents, and standard content. Now, we're going to talk about standard content later. It's really important. But current document is basically just, for example, that main robot document I keep talking about. That's where current document would be where the assemblies and other folders would be stored or things like that. So it's where I can pull something from somewhere else in that same document down here, but it's not, I'm still pulling it into this assembly. Other documents is pretty much everything else. So I can see I have folders of actual other documents in here. We can actually go into the public Onshape. So this is where a lot of people have made things public. Things are private by default. So I can just get one of these. Yeah. But other documents is where the parts library is going to be stored. So for you guys, it's going to be in a team, probably called parts library, with parts library somewhere in the name or parts. But for us, it's in our personal team folder. So I'm going to be making a basic Actibotics drive base. Actually, this is what you guys will be building today, or learning how to build. This is if you guys end up not being able to follow along, or maybe there's a computer problem. We're going to be recording this and posting this to our YouTube channel, FTC Team 2901 Purple Gears. So once it's done, pretty soon it'll be posted. If you end up falling behind, don't panic. But this is what you guys are going to be building today, complete with turning wheels. That is, of course, assuming I did it right. Okay, so this is my Onshape not loading. That's one disadvantage of an online software. Yeah. I forgot to mention, if you guys have a question, you can actually go to participants and hit raise hand, and we can answer the question. But to build that first, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the bars. So I'm going to go to Server City, Structural Components, and then I'm going to hit Channel and Standard Channel. This is all in the Servo City thing. I want a 12-inch bar just because I know that a little bit more. I know that sort of length, we use it quite a bit. So when I click on a part in this insert thing, it automatically appears in my viewport and it follows my mouse. Now, in order to get it to stop following my mouse in the viewport, I just click once. I'm going to put another one in there because I want two. Now, if you notice, these are actually pointing straight up and down. You can see that because the view cube in this corner, there's a top view, there's a front view, there's a right view. You can see that. We want our robot to always be pointing in the right direction. It's always a hassle when you build a mechanism and then realize it's sideways of the main model or something like that. So what we're going to do is before we sort of fix anything in place to build off of, we're going to rotate them. To do that, we're going to click on a part, and this little gizmo is going to come up here. Now, this gizmo has 3 arrows, one for each global axis, X, Y, and Z. And so I can move them in any of these axes. I can say, okay, I want to move it this way by 5 inches, something like that. But on the end of the gizmo is also 3 sort of circles with arcs on them. These arcs correspond with how they're going to rotate the part. For example, this arc is going around this way, so that means when I click and drag it, it's going to rotate the part that way. So I can just type in 90 degrees, and it's automatically turning at a perfect right angle. So that's what you really like about Onshape. There's no guessing and checking. There's no, hey, did I turn this 89.5? No, it's exactly 90. So now we notice that it seems to be oriented almost the right way. I'm actually going to rotate it just 90 degrees around this way. I want that bottom part to be solid. But now it's still in the wrong place. Positioning is wrong. So to move a part in Onshape, I could use those arrows and manually move it, but I want it at this center here. This is the origin. So this little dot is the 0 coordinate, the center of our assembly. And that means when we insert something, it will automatically, the origin will line up with our mouse. So when I pulled these bars in there, my mouse was lined up with their origin. So to move it to the origin, I can just right-click on the center circle of that gizmo and hit move to origin. But I can still click and drag them and move them around. So I can just hit Control-Z to undo. But to make it stop being movable at all, I can just sort of freeze it in place with the Fix tool. So I just right-click on it and hit Fix. And that makes it stuck in place. No matter how much I click and drag it, it won't move. I can build off of it in the future. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to attach this bar to the bar I just fixed. This one's going to be forming the center of the frame of our robot. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a mate. And I have part side for this one too. But a mate is basically it relates the position and rotation of 2 points. So it's really useful for like basically assembling anything. So a fasten, for example, it takes a position of 2 points, one on each part, and it sets the position equal, and it also means that no rotation can happen on that point. So for example, I can choose the center of 2 holes on a bar, and I can fasten them together. And that means they'll go to the same exact place unless I use an offset to sort of pull them apart, but it won't rotate at all. It's like screwing 2 parts completely together or super gluing them together. A revolute, however, those parts still can't move, but they can rotate because each mate has its own unique coordinate plane. So each mate has a x-axis, a y-axis, and a z-axis, unique to each one. But a revolute allows parts to rotate on the z-axis, and that means that pieces can turn and basically act as bushings and bearings. That's what it's really useful for. A slider is sort of like a fasten, except it doesn't allow rotation, and it allows movement on the z-axis. So it's useful for things like rails or linear slides, where things aren't twisting, but they're still sliding in and out. And a cylindrical is, these aren't all of the mains, I'm just summing up a few of them, but a cylindrical really constitutes a combination between a revolute and a slider, is the word, but it allows things to move on the z-axis and turn on the z-axis. For example, lead screws. So they move in and out and they turn. So that's a really useful mate for them instead of having to do like a slider or like a disable something. Basically, that's what a cylindrical is used for. So I'm going to use a fasten to attach these two bars. So to do a fasten, I can either hit the M key, which is the shortcut for any mate, or I can go up here to this top toolbar. Now, the first of the mates, because it's the most used, is this fasten mate. It's the one that looks like two pieces interlocking together. When I click on it, it brings up the mate dialog. Now, the mate dialog, all it's really asking for at the moment is mate connectors. Those mate connectors are going to be the points that are related. So because I'm sticking one of the holes on here to one of the holes on here, the center of those holes is going to be my mate connectors. So I'm going to find the center of this because I know how many holes it is roughly. That one, pretty sure. So I'm going to hover over this because whenever I hover over anything in Onshape, when I have this mate connector thing turned blue, it shows me possible mate connectors. So for example, it's showing me all of the centers of these holes, the centers of these edges. All of those are possible mate connectors. You can make your own, actually. I'll talk about that. If you guys want to talk about it specifically, I can. But I will definitely be talking about it in a future class. But all of these white dots are possible mate connectors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover over this, and I could just get close to that center dot, or I could hover over the edge of that hole specifically. Whenever there's that circle thing with the axes in it, that means that that's the mate connector it's suggesting you select at the moment. So when I click, it selects that mate connector, and I can actually go ahead and, let's see, that's the top. I want to be on the bottom here. I can hover over this one and do the same thing. Now you'll notice these bars are still parallel to one another. In order to turn them 90 degrees, I'm going to use one of these three buttons here, specifically the middle one. So this is the reorient secondary axis button. What it does is it turns the mate 90 degrees around that z-axis, the blue one. So when I hit it, it automatically just turns it around that axis, turns the mate itself, not just the part. But there's also another piece here, this button I want to emphasize, and that's the flip primary axis. You'll often encounter a problem where you'll have done a mate and it's going to look like this, where the bar is intersecting the other bar and it all looks like it's broken. That's just the fact that the z-axis of the mate is pointing in the wrong direction. So to fix that, we can actually just press this flip button here, and it will automatically flip that z-axis and basically flip the direction of the mate. Now, before I hit check, this is something I really want to emphasize, I always try to remember to name the mates. Because when you get into larger models, like the mate robot document I was talking about earlier, when you have a page full of mates, it gets a bit of a pain to sort through fastens 1 through 50 and just sort of check, is this the one I'm looking for? Is this the one I'm looking for? So when you hit this pencil button up here, you can rename the mate. I always do it sort of like the name of one of the parts dash the name of the other part. So for example, middle bar dash, that's fine. Middle bar dash sidebar. That'll make it easy to come back to later, because when I hit check, it's going to show up named over here. It's because it takes 2 seconds now, but it saves you 2 minutes later. That's basically my sort of philosophy with it. So now that we have these two bars fastened together, we need to actually add the parts that drive, the motors and the wheels. Now to do that, I'm going to sort of flip the model over just by right-clicking and dragging, because the motor is going to be going on the bottoms. I'm going to insert the motor mount, the motor, the axle hub, and the wheel now, just by going to other documents. Again, it'll be labeled with the parts library there. Just, again, put your email in the chat or email it to roboticsclub@cghsnc.org, and you'll get access to that parts library. But I'm going to go into Servo City. Structural components is where the motor mounts are. Again, also, this parts library is organized just like the vendor websites are. So all of these folders we have here, this is just like the Servo City website. It's the same with the GoBuilda one and all of the other vendor sort of folders. So I know the motor that we're going to be using, it's a yellow jacket, is going to be 32 millimeters. Now you might notice I'm only inserting one of them, and that's for a reason. That's because we're going to actually replicate it around the rest of the sort of robot. That's going to be at the very end. We're going to go back up, motion components, rotary motion, because we're going to get the hub. And so this is where we have to be careful, because you'll notice in here, there are two tabs, Part Studios and Assemblies. If you insert the Part Studios for a component that's an assembly, like the motor, the motor is made up of multiple different parts, the shaft, the body, the front part of the body, the gearbox, things like that. If you insert a Part Studio, you have to insert all of those individually, you're going to have to mate them yourself, and the mates might not be perfect. But if you go to the assemblies page here, this assembly has, and this one is just a screw, but it has all of the components mated together, and it's going to bring the mates over. It's a lot more reliable than just sort of bringing all the Part Studios in. It's also a lot faster. It's the main reason we use it. But always check if there's an assembly to use before you import a part. Okay, now we're just going to go get the wheel and the motor, and then we should be able to assemble those. Should be the last of the things we need to insert. So you'll notice here, again, there's a tread in the hub of the wheel. If I only inserted sort of this folder of them, I would be able to pull the wheel apart. But because I'm inserting the assembly, that wheel stays together. It brings with it the fasten mate that holds this onto that. I'm going to go all the way back out to GoBuilda, which is right there. As you can see, these are like the main GoBuilda tabs you see on the website, just like those. So motors, we're going to be using, I guess 3.7 to 1, just because it's really fast, I guess. It's just really any motor would work for this example. But actually, let me just demonstrate with the Part Studios. So I can't demonstrate because for this parts library, for some of them, the ones we know where it's easy to make a mistake and import the Part Studios, we've actually gone ahead and made those Part Studios unavailable. So you can still view them if you open the document, but you just can't insert them because it's just, you don't really need to only insert the motor axle, that sort of thing. So you hit assemblies, insert that. Now that we have everything we need, we can go ahead and assemble it. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit M to make a fasten mate. And threaded holes are a bit tricky. So you can just hover over the face and get the center of that hole like that, sometimes. Or you can actually hover over one of the edges on that hole. Now, you have to be careful with threaded holes because sometimes, not that hole, for sure this hole is just blocked, but sometimes this isn't one continuous edge because oftentimes the thread actually comes all the way up and intersects that. So you have to be careful if you're getting the center hole for that hole or that particular part of the thread. Because like if you notice, like sometimes I can actually manage to get a center mate connector, but it's not the right one. So just always be careful when you're using threaded holes. So then we're gonna just mate that to the Actibotics part. We're gonna have to flip it, like I said before, flip and it's on top, and then rotate around, reorient secondary axis. That turns at 90 degrees around the Z, and that's in the right place. So we're gonna rename the mate. So motor mount to sidebar. Okay. And so this is where things get a little bit different because from here previous, we've only been mating holes to holes. Now we're mating sort of the face of something to a hole because we're putting the motor in that motor mount. What we're going to do is we're going to select either sort of the center axis of the motor, anywhere we want along it. I prefer, though, to select the center sort of face connector, the mate connector of the face of the motor. That just makes it convenient for me to know exactly where I'm measuring off of, things like that. So then I'm going to select the outer edge of that hole so it gives me the center. And if you notice, two things are on here. First, it only gave me the sort of front half, the front part of the motor. But that's actually not sort of like a problem at the moment, because Onshape, when you mate two things together and one of them is part of assembly, it only brings that one part until it sort of gets a chance to refresh the other mates. So when I hit solve here, it says, oh wait, I need to bring the rest of the motor, and it refreshes all of the other mates. It would also do that if you went ahead and hit check, but it's just useful to see where is everything going to be before I confirm the mate. I'm also going to flip this one right here and hit solve again, just so it's all in the right place. Okay, and then rename the mate, motor to motor mount, and hit check. So actually, I might not want this motor to be all the way against the face of this. Might want it to be sticking out a little bit just for stability. So to do that, I'm going to use what's called an offset. So I'm going to edit this mate either by double clicking or by right clicking and hitting edit. So to make an offset, you see at the bottom here, it has the offset checkbox. It's usually disabled. So you check that box, and then you get the option to move the mate along any of its local axes. So for example, I can say, okay, I want to move it 1 inch along the x-axis, and you can see it moves 1 inch along that red line. You can also put in negative numbers to move in the other direction. Note that negative numbers don't actually flip the part, just move it in a different direction. Now the z-axis, again, is mostly in and out of a hole. So to move it out, I'm just going to say, I want to move it out 1 inch. Now that looks like a little bit too far, so let's just reduce it down to 0.5. There we go. I'm going to hit check. And now it's moved out by 1/2 inch, and it's not so sort of stuck out this way. Excuse me. And so the next thing we need to do is we need to put this hub on this axle. Now, one thing to be thinking about with every mate you make is this accurate to the real motion of the robot, of how the components work? So in the past, I've seen people mate the motor or the hub to the motor itself, just because it's a little bit easier. But if you made it to the motor, that means the hub isn't going to rotate with that axle. So you always need to make sure, mate the hub to the actual axle is rotating on. So I'm just going to select the center, this outside edge here is going to give me the center mate connector. And then I'm going to select the edge of, I could either select the face here, or what's a little bit more reliable is the outside edge. The outside edge is more reliable because faces, the center sort of mate connector of face, isn't actually like the center of whatever circles around it. It's more like the center of gravity of that face. So for example, if I go to the end of this bar and hover over the face of that, it doesn't give me the center of the outline. It gives me sort of the average of the position of all of those points. So it might not be the center. So I always use edges, because if they're an arc, it will give you the actual exact center. Now that it's on there, you'll notice, this D-hub isn't lined up. You'll notice it's a D-hub. It's not lined up with that face. So what you can do is you can hit this reorient secondary axis button twice, and it'll be almost completely lined up with that face. I'm going to rename this mate before I actually confirm it so I can show you guys something else. But it's called motor hub to axle. I hit check, and you'll notice this D-hub still isn't parallel to that piece. I'll just move the zoom thing. It's off by 6.19 degrees. I'm going to go ahead and copy that, because I'm going to actually rotate this part on that mate by that amount. So I'm going to go to the mate, but instead of editing the mate directly, I'm going to hit this arrow, and it's going to expand it to show me the individual mate connectors. I'm going to edit the mate connector of the hub, just because I don't want to touch the motor. The motor is a little bit more finicky. But I can actually edit the mate connector, and I can hit move. Now move, you can do the same thing as you can with offsets, or I can rotate it around one of these axes. So I'm going to rotate it around the Z by that much. We'll see if that made it worse. So we're going to hit negative. But Onshape doesn't actually like negative angles. So what you can do in Onshape, this is a really nice feature, you can actually put calculations directly into a field. When I hit enter, it'll actually run that calculation for me and figure out that opposite angle. So I can do that in sort of dimensions and sketches, which we'll cover later on in another class, and offsets as well, so I can measure two distances and subtract them in the offset, things like that. I can go ahead and offset this mate because I want it further along that shaft. So I'm going to make it, let's say, 0.3. This is where I'm talking about negative offsets. You'll notice it moved it that way instead of that way. So to fix that, we just put a negative 0.3, and it'll move it in the opposite direction. When hit check, and you notice its screw moves with it. Now that we're ready to put the wheel on, we can just go ahead and do the fasten like we did in the bar or any other part. The center hole of this, the center hole of this. And you notice it does intersect again, so we're going to hit the flip button. And then rename wheel to hub. Enter. Check. Okay. So now all of this is pretty much done, except for screws. Screws are an often overlooked piece of the model, but they're really useful to put into models because it means you can see, is there enough room for the screw head? Is the screw actually accessible? Things like that. So to put in screws, we're going to use that standard content tab that I sort of skipped over earlier. Standard content is where you can almost generate parts. So I can tell it what standard my part is, whether it uses ANSI or one of these other standards. So what category part I want. This time I'm getting screws, but I might also be able to get nuts, washers, retaining rings, all that. There's individual classes under that sort of main category. And then there's more classes under that category if you want to get rid of the exact. So we're using socket head screws, and specifically socket head cap screws rather than button heads or countersunk ones. Put in your size, put your drive type, and then you need to put in your length. But before you can put in your length, you need to know the length of the part, or the length of the screw needed. So to measure something in Onshape, what you do is you select one piece of geometry, be it a face, a point, an edge, really anything, and then you select the other piece of geometry. And it'll tell you if they're parallel, the parallel distance. It'll also tell you the minimum distance, the angle, things like that. So now that I know that the screw needs to be about 0.52 inches long, I can change this length to be 0.5. I always round to the next lowest screw length, just so I don't end up going too far, hitting something, stripping the threads, or anything like that. So instead of, I know sometimes people will actually insert the screws and then mate them. Instead of doing that, which takes a while, you can actually do something really innovative in Onshape, which I really like. You select these edges, the edges of the holes that the screws are going in. So they're just going through the wheel and into the hub. And then I hit insert. And what it does is it automatically inserts those screws into those holes, mates them there, and also adds mate connectors that we can edit if we want to later. Now, the only downside to this is it doesn't rename these mates over here. What I can do there is I can just rename one of them. So hub screw 1. And then I can copy that and just go through and rename them and just change the number. The numbers on these mates aren't really necessary, but I find them very useful going through later, especially if it's telling me that one of these mates is erroring. I know specifically which one. But so now we have this corner of the drive face all finished, but the rest of it is still left empty. Rather than individually modeling like each of these corners, we actually have a really cool tool called Replicate. Replicate is up here. It looks like the square with the 2 cylinders going into it. What Replicate lets us do is it lets us select parts. So I'm going to select it from over here in this parts menu just because it lets me select assemblies. But I can select these parts. I can actually select the screws as well. And it lets me copy them over to another place of my choosing, complete with the mates intact and everything, as well as the names. So now its default option is to find edges on the face to match with. If I select that, it will put one of these sort of assemblies at every single hole in this face. Not exactly what we want. I mean, it would be fast, but not really possible to put together. So we're going to hit match individual edges. So I'm going to figure out, okay, what hole did I mate this sort of assembly to? And that's that hole that's highlighted right over there. Okay. I'm gonna select the same or similar hole that I made it to over there, and it'll load. Boom. It copies it and remates it over here. Now this saved a lot of time in modeling. It's actually a relatively recent feature in Onshape. Onshape's constantly pumping out new features. But when I hit check, you'll notice it actually copied the names for those mates as well. So we don't have to go through and rename things. And actually, if we want to make this just even faster, we can just go ahead and select pretty much everything. And then deselect that center bar, do match individual faces or edges, and then select this edge over here. And we just cut our time in half, or actually further if you consider those smaller assemblies. When I hit this check button, it basically means I only have to model this one part of the assembly, and I can just replicate everything else. But you'll notice this is still off. It's pointing inwards instead of outwards. So I can just double click on this mate. The name's the same as before. Reorient secondary axis twice. Hit solve, and it works. Yeah. And then, yeah, that's actually pretty much it. Again, if you want access to the parts library, you can email us at roboticsclub@cjhsnc.org. There's the email. That's how you get access to that parts library. And then also, if you have any other questions, you can go ahead and actually ask. You can use the participants raise hand button if you have any final questions or anything. Or if you're on Discord, you can contact one of the team members on Discord as well. Yeah. Anybody have any questions? No? Okay then. Hope you guys stay safe, do well with Onshape. Thanks for coming.